First, this is the most terrifying experience I have ever had in my entire life. Background: imagine I was studying abroad in Ferrara, Italy, a couple of years ago, living by myself in an old apartment building built in the 1400s. Paper-thin walls, creepy old armoires all around the house. I had just gotten back from a vacation in Greece, not knowing the landlady was going to be doing some repairs. I entered my apartment with furniture in all different places. All of the chairs in the apartment, 5 in all, were lined up neatly in the single hallway, and everything else was in a different position. I thought someone had broken in. I was so tired from flying and being up, I decided to take a nap. Story: I remember this so clearly. I must have been asleep for about an hour and it all started. I had opened my eyes and briefly moved them about, scanning the room without moving my head, and I noticed a person walk in front of my bed across the room. He was dressed all in black with a hat on. Imagine a Van Helsing looking person, but I could never distinguish the face. I thought he was a burglar or something, and that he was trying to rob me while I slept. In my mind, I was going to wait until he was digging through a desk to the left of me and spring up and subdue him. I heard him start muttering something, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I believed this my chance and attempted to spring out of the bed with all my might, but lo and behold, I could not move. I let out a muffled "ugh," loud enough that after the predicament, my neighbor knocked on the door to see if something happened. That's when the creepiest part happened. I heard the man who was just standing next to me say, "You can't move, can you, boy? This is what it feels like to be helpless," in a Hannibal Lecter, Anthony Hopkins voice, and he let out a maniacal cackle, which, when I think about, still makes the hair on my neck stand up. I closed my eyes and tried again to spring up, and I sat up in my bed with such fervor that I sent the whole bed and frame sliding across the floor. My entire body ached as if I was just lifting weights. My heart was beating out of my chest, and when I looked to the left of me, nothing was there. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for a few days in fear of it happening again. That was the only time I have ever experienced that, and I hope to never have it happen again. Go easy on me as I type this with my phone and don't feel like editing. Also, first post. I've never had sleep paralysis before I moved to my new apartment, which I now believe is haunted. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom with a big room that has a connected kitchen living room, and you can see the kitchen from the bedroom. I live there alone. I'm a man, if that matters. I actually have 5 very different and vivid experiences, which I will describe from memory below. In a general sense, it's like a very vivid dream that takes place in your bedroom. You feel fully conscious, but you can't move. Once you're able to make yourself move, you'll wake up. These stories have not been embellished because they need no embellishment. My latest experience happened pretty recently and was terrifying but minor. I was lying on my side facing away from the door. I felt the entity standing right next to my bed and close behind me, and heard it say my name in a very sinister voice. Remember that this is very vivid. It was as if I could hear them in real life. I could also see the entity in my mind, some sort of monster wearing a black robe, but as it is with dreams, it did not have many details. It wouldn't have made any sense for me to be able to see it either since my back was to it, but I guess that's just how it works. As soon as it said my name, I turned around to face it. The act of physically turning woke me up. Nothing was there, of course. I remember that part vividly, but leading up to it, I vaguely remember the feeling or realization that there were several entities in my room quietly discussing me. One sleep paralysis of mine was highly auditory. I was lying on my back and I could see my bedroom and into my apartment kitchen from the door as if it were daytime. My brain's ability to reconstruct the apartment so vividly still amazes me, since it was in the middle of the night and there is no way it could have been as light as it appeared to me. Anyway, I could hear someone rummaging through my kitchen and living room making a lot of noise. One distinct noise I remember was a crunching as if eating cereal. I wasn't scared, but I was actually kind of angry that this entity was making my apartment at his disposal. I think I fell into a deeper sleep after this experience rather than waking up. Another short one was when I saw some sort of ghost banshee type woman coming at me from my bedroom door, howling. Think of the stereotypical movie ghost, transparent, blue, floating with ragged robe-like clothes. It kept approaching me, screaming for what seemed like a long time, but the door is not that far from my bed. I remember trying very hard to scream back, but of course I could not since I was in the paralysis state. Bonus from my sister, she had done a ton of ecstasy the night before and was in her dorm room. She remembers seeing a cloaked figure standing at the end of her bed. Apparently, he pulled out a knife and then slowly circled around to stand beside her. The worst, scary one that I have experienced involved some sort of evil pizza man pyramid head hybrid. The reason why I think Pyramid Head is because earlier that day, or perhaps a few days beforehand, I had been reading a walkthrough of one of the Silent Hills, and apparently there's a cut scene where a Pyramid Head is raping some other monster. I have not actually played the game. I like to read random walkthroughs of games sometimes. Anyway, this entity didn't have the pyramid head and instead had a normal human head with sort of spiky black hair. The face either had no details or I couldn't remember them. It was wearing a white apron, robe-like thing similar to PH though. He was seemingly carrying a pizza box. So this thing is standing in my doorway and says to me, "Want some pizza? No? How about rape?" Yes, it sounds like a horrible joke, but I explicitly remember this happening in the dream. Then he proceeds to jump directly on top of me and starts humping me to the rhythm of a song he was humming. I don't remember the song, and it may have not even been a real song, but the rhythm sort of reminds me of this song. I think that the entity was also singing some words, perhaps including something like rapey, rape, rape, but I could be remembering that wrong. As he did this, I was struggling very hard to move. The act of me trying to move my upper body back and forth woke me up. Thankfully, I was not actually being raped by anything. I've never actually been raped either. It was mildly traumatic. My final story exemplifies that sleep paralysis is not all bad. This time, I was on my back and there were a bunch of people outside my apartment. A few guys and a few girls who were having that sort of after-party banter as if they had come back from watching a movie or a nice casual dinner or what have you. There were no actual words in their speech, but I could see them pretty clearly. Obviously impossible if it were real since they were outside. It was actually pretty comforting, and I like the feeling of seeing people come home after a good time. One of the girls with very short brown hair is now in my apartment. She goes into my bedroom and proceeds to undress standing at the edge of my bed. I can't remember if she took off her bottoms, but she definitely took off her top, and I could see her small breasts. This dream entity doesn't seem to know I'm there. Perhaps I was not there in her reality, but she crawls into my bed and lies down in a fetal position next to me, lying on top of my arm. I lift my arm up. Of course, this act wakes me up and the dream vanishes. I also have a pretty awesome story about my scariest dream, but since it wasn't sleep paralysis, I won't include it here. It's happened to me 3 times in the last 6 months. The first time, I was staying with a friend. I was in his basement and the door was closed and everything was quite dark. I saw the door open, it was pitch black just before, and multicolored lights started to flash around the room, almost as if guided by a hand. At this point, I tried to scream as loud as I could to get my friend and his wife upstairs to wake up and rescue me. Nothing came out. I couldn't move. It was still very dark and the lights were very dim and small themselves, but I could feel a presence approach the side of my bed, and then I spasmed and bounced off the bed a foot into the air. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but I was very disturbed. The first thing I thought was that I'd been abducted by aliens and replaced in bed with most of my memory erased. Yeah, I've seen some X-Files. I'd been having a rough time with depression and grief, so I even thought I was going crazy until I talked to my friend the next morning. The next time, I was staying at my sister's apartment and sleeping on a couch. I was lying on my back when a dark, featureless figure crossed the kitchen, stood beside me, and put a dark pillow over my face. The phantom disappeared and I could move again instantly. The third time, I was laying in bed and the door opened and the silhouette of a person was visible against the light. This time, I was aware of what was happening and it just kind of shrugged it off. Each time, it felt like I hadn't fallen asleep and hadn't woken from a dream either. I was in the same position and felt the same stream of consciousness. They're pretty freaky, but honestly, I wasn't nearly as scared as I imagined myself being when I heard of these 15, 20 years ago. Cool. I got a chance to share some of my experience with this. I've had sleep paralysis about 6, maybe 7 times. I was diagnosed with daily migraines about 3 years ago, and that's around when they started. I believe migraine and SP are linked. Anyways, my first experience was one summer night and I was 16 years old. I was a few weeks away from attending a church camp I had been going to for a few years. I'm no longer spiritual or religious in any way, but at the time I was very convinced of God and demons being real. I awoke, seemed like any other time I had been jerked awake, until I realized I couldn't move. I then began to notice I had no control over my vocal cords as I was trying to scream, and that there was this pressure on my chest like someone was standing on me. I noticed a floating, black, semi-shapeless figure above me. Eventually, I was able to scream and get out of bed. The strangest thing was that as soon as I got out of bed, I guess the power had been out and all the lights in the house that were on before turned on right as I walked out of my room. I was terrified it was demons and stayed up all night freaking out. I learned within that year I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I've had the same similar event happen since then, but I don't panic anymore and just wait it out. It's never pleasant, but at least it's no longer horrifying. Interesting side note, I went into the Mayo Clinic to do a sleep study to test for narcolepsy, and they actually captured me having sleep paralysis on video and with all their machines wired to me. I got to see where my eyes were open, but my muscle tone hadn't changed. It was the first time they'd seen it in their time doing these studies and were very excited. I felt cool being the talk of the sleep department of the Mayo Clinic for a little bit. I've been getting this almost nightly as of late. I think in my case, it just goes hand in hand with the general mild depression that comes with the daily grind of a desk job. It has become just a part of my nightly routine. I've noticed that for me, there are 3 stages: the normal dream, the realization that I can't move, and always the accompanying revelation that I'm dreaming. And the last bit is the worst, the struggle to wake up while the dream continues. Completely aware of both the dream and a slightly discontented, paralyzed version of my body. Sound and sensations from the dream continue, but I'm also very, very aware of my body straining to open my eyes. Waking up from one when I win and I force my eyes open is weird. It's like my eyes are still asleep and everything takes a bit to swim into focus from black and my mind snaps back to normal body. Usually in a position that doesn't resemble what position my paralyzed dream body was in. Then I realize I'm okay and wonder if I should take up smoking and not waste my balcony. Usually whatever dream I'm having just fades away, and I just remember not being able to move in the space behind. The following morning, I just remember having had a paralysis dream. Last night, I was lying in my bed when bugs started biting me painfully hard. I realized I was in a paralysis dream when I couldn't move away from the bugs' bites. The bugs continued nipping at me as I struggled to wake myself. Their bites became less painful as I woke up. This one was one of the rare ones where the dream fights me. Usually, shortly after I realize I'm in a paralysis dream, I float away from the dream to the dark space behind, or what have you. About a week ago, I had a classic giant demon shadow holding me down so I can't move, paralysis dream. I realized the dream when I couldn't move, and since this one was just one of many, felt no fear at the lingering dream. The worst ones are when I get stacked dreams. I wake up from one dream only to find myself paralyzed in another dream. The worst one of these was when I fell asleep on the floor of my college dorm studying. In the first dream, I was stabbed by an intruder who then ran away. I couldn't move or yell or writhe at all and realized it was a dream. I struggled and woke up, only to be paralyzed in the position I fell asleep in, on my side, face in a black plastic floor cushion, saliva pooling to the left side. I couldn't wipe away the drool, and it began to pool inside the butt indents of the cushion, drowning me. I struggled and woke up. It was a very gentle awakening, from what I can remember. No jumping up in terror while wiping my mouth like you'd expect. There wasn't any drool at all. TLDR, I get these a lot. Mostly just remember existing in the space behind and struggling to move. Sometimes I get really scary ones. I awoke one morning to the sound of low voices in my room. I opened my eyes, turned my head a little to the right, and there were 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman, next to my bed. I could see my digital clock over his shoulder, and it read 7:25 a.m. The male agent was setting up a 35mm camera on a tripod to take photos of me as I slept, and the woman was just standing there, looking at me with an annoyed expression on her face. I could hear a third agent taking photos of items in my hall closet and bathroom. I wanted to sit up and say, "Hey, what the hell are you doing here?" and ask to see their warrant, but I couldn't move at all, nor could I speak. I could open and close my eyes and turn my head a tiny bit, but that was all. And the FBI agents didn't even seem to notice I was awake. The male one took a few photos of me and made some joke in a low voice to the female agent, who just rolled her eyes. I closed my eyes and tried to concentrate on moving, but still could not. I tried fighting against it, to no avail. And then I felt myself slipping back down into sleep, with the sounds of the agents' voices growing fuzzy and indistinct. When I opened my eyes again, the agents were gone, and my digital clock read 7:27 a.m. I was fully awake that time and able to move once more. The whole thing was so incredibly vivid, I checked out my entire apartment for signs of disturbance and spent days feeling rather paranoid. Logically, I understood that the experience was sleep paralysis, but I had a hard time shaking the sense that the agents had been there. I'm always completely aware of the layout of the room I'm in, but I don't think I actually see anything. Everything is where it should be, even if I kicked off socks the day before and they're laying somewhere random. They're where they are in reality. I'll have had a nightmare and I wake up, scared, but my room is normal enough and I can feel my boyfriend asleep next to me, so I assume everything is fine. But when I go to move, I realize I can't, and that's when all hell breaks loose. My boyfriend is next to me on the bed. Having pulled the covers off of me, he starts peeling my skin from my body, eating it. He laughs a lot. I beg him to stop, to not do that anymore, but he keeps laughing and eating my skin. By this point, my brain knows it's a dream, that it's not real, so I try to wake myself up, but I just can't. I can't do anything. Once he's skinned me completely, he starts cutting my toes off one by one. Then my feet, ankles, shins are cut into, knees. Slowly, he works his way up, laughing like a fucking crazy bastard the entire time, eating everything as he goes. And eventually, only my head is left, I assume. This is when I usually wake up, finally. And then my boyfriend realizes I've had a nightmare, so he tries to comfort me, but I just fucking watched him eat me alive, so I try to get away. It takes a while to convince me that it isn't real, that he didn't do it. And then I try and get more sleep, only for it to repeat again. It's the worst feeling in the universe. You can't move, you can't scream, nothing. You just lay there telling your brain to move your arm, to break the spell you're under, do anything, absolutely anything, but it doesn't work. So instead, you lay there and suffer horrible nightmares that are so real, you question your sanity when you wake up. And the majority of the time, you're not even sure you're awake or not. You just wait for someone you love to start skinning you alive. It has only happened to me once in my life, and that is also how many times I've told this story since it happened. I will say I am grateful having it happened at the age it had, because its long-term effect on me was that it helped further shape my world and life perspective, I believe for the better. A brief backstory for posterity. I was 19 at the time of the incident, and for the previous 3.5 years had been engaging in amateur paranormal investigations with a group of friends. I had started to solidify my status as an atheist, but was still too young and distant from any influence that would remotely challenge my thoughts or beliefs on ghosts, poltergeists, apparitions, and the like. It was March 2000. I had just moved back to Massachusetts after several years in Kentucky. Due to lingering animosities, my mom's fiance would not permit me to stay in his house, so she graciously paid for a motel room to crash out for a week till either I started working or whatever we could figure out by then. The motel is located in Ware, behind a dairy bar. The room I stayed in was number 3. The first couple of nights were no sweat. I didn't suffer from insomnia like I did when I was older, so sleep time came at a fairly reasonable hour. I had gotten in the habit of sleeping with the TV on, sans volume, typically for ambiance and comfort. The third night was no different. Bologna and cheese sandwich with chips and Coke and ice cream from the dairy bar. Lena was wrapping up and my head hit the pillow. And then it happened. Get out. It was a deep, elongated growl reaching up through the darkest depths of my subconscious. A voice that should awaken even the deepest of dreamers. Instead, my eyes warily opened, and what I was able to discern out of one of them, the other was blinded by my pillow as I was laying with my side turned, facing left, could very well have frightened me stiff had I been fully awake and cognizant. I saw a white, wispy, dragon-like demon. It had no discernible facial features other than its hundreds of needle-like teeth. It had no eyes, but its sockets emitted the same wispy-like smoke as the rest of it did. To try and relate it to something recognizable, imagine a ghost-like dragon, much in the same vein as the ring wraiths in LOTR after Frodo puts on the ring, and its mouth looks like Venom smiling, but without the tongue. Terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought, I did the only thing I could think of, close my eyes and try to bury my face in my pillow. The thing was, the only part of my body I had been able to move was my eyelid. I was slowly discovering I couldn't move my body. I then started to feel a pressure on my back, as if something was sitting on top of me. I could feel it becoming harder to breathe, and even though the pressure was on my back, my arms and legs remained motionless, despite, in my mind, I'm willing the fuck out of them to fight, thrash, do something. I tried screaming, but all that was coming out was strained, terrified whimpers. Then it came again. Get out. This time, the voice was right in my ear, as if it was just sitting there on me, leering over to deliver its message of caution. I could hear it, not just through my ears, but also at my very core. I could feel it vibrate all the way down my motionless body. It was, to this day, among the most vulnerable and defenseless I can ever remember being. And almost like a coiled spring, the moment I felt the pressure release off my back, I sprung out of bed, completely hurdled the other bed in the room, beelined it straight to the light switch, and flipped it on. And of course, nothing was there. No dog growling Zool, no interdimensional lens flare effect as the demon cuts off his tie to our plane of existence and disappears. Nothing. But that means little in the world of this newly relocated ghost hunter who, as far as he knew, thought and was probably willing to believe at that point, had just been told he had worn out his welcome by the resident demon who has occupied this out-of-the-way rural motel. The next day, I arrange lunch with my mom and proceed to tell her this incredible tale of being accosted by a demon dragon and the motel's haunted, and I'm in full Egon mode. My mother, bless her soul, was a nature-loving and respecting human who never really professed much of an organized religion, but did believe in ghosts and the like. So while she wasn't suiting up a proton pack with me, she did take me at enough of my word to expedite my removal from that place and talked her fiancé into letting me stay at the house. Now, fast forward a few days, and I'm walking through the living room and the TV is on. I must have walked in after the program had started because as I entered the room, I hear the narrator ask a setup question, slightly paraphrasing. Is there a link between sleep paralysis and paranormal phenomenon, including alien abductions? I stopped dead in my tracks. I had never heard the term sleep paralysis before, and I was enthralled as I stood there and listened to all these testimonials that, well, with the exception of the specific apparition I visually experienced, all had described experiencing circumstances that mirrored exactly what I had experienced the other night. The audio awareness, the feeling of pressure or being weighed down, the inability to move your body, the shortness of breath, everything. Researchers went on to explain our 4 stages of sleep and the line between our stage where we dream and our subconscious, and what happens when our conscious mind gets invaded by our still active dream state. At the end of the program, I was a changed person, not because I had received new data and information to incorporate into my existing knowledge of my experience, but because that mindset, that scientific method, that set of critical thinking processes and influence was what I needed. My mind was changing, the way I looked at information, prioritized and processed information. I was evolving, and this new mindset was immediately applied to my previous paranormal endeavors and future accounts, both experienced on my own and through stories of others. It sounds like a very trivial experience and one that probably shouldn't have warranted a story this wordy, but to me, it was a very profound experience that taught me probably the most valuable lesson about scientific inquiry. Seek not to find what is, but what isn't. Hope you enjoyed my story. This will get buried, but here it goes. The worst case of sleeping paralysis was when I was severely deprived from sleep due to depression or stress. I woke up hearing whispers outside of my door. It sounded like random people speaking in tongues. It was disturbing. Since I was still sleeping while being at the time, I somehow started to sleepwalk. I could not control myself even though I felt myself physically walk out of the bed. I headed towards the door, opened it up, and the whispers started to become louder. I looked at the end of the hallway and I noticed that the sound came from there. So naturally, I headed towards the whispers, and it became louder and louder as I approached. I opened the door to our walk-in closet, in which I saw this demon standing in there, looking at me with his eyes that gleamed brightly. As soon as I saw this demon, I saw it launch at the door, and I, still in my sleep, fell backwards and I screamed. This is the first time I have ever been this scared from a dream. I thought I was literally being attacked, and I couldn't tell if I still was in this dream or not because of the transition. I had an insane adrenaline rush. I woke everyone else up as they thought I had been attacked. One thing I have learned after this event is that even a little sleep deprivation will fuck around with my brain. Even after LAN parties, I'll take a nap and sometimes I get into a sleeping paralysis without any hallucinations. Oh well. I've experienced sleep paralysis occasionally since middle school. I didn't even know what it was until one of my friends told me about it. When I was younger, it mostly happened when I was falling asleep. When I realized it was happening, it felt like I was falling asleep wrong somehow, and I would get this sudden, sure sense of being about to die if I didn't start moving right that second. So I would try with all my might to roll back and forth. I can only fall asleep on my side, and it was so terrifying that I couldn't make any movements, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I was so sure I was gonna die. And then I would move and be okay. Like, what the fuck just happened, brain? Later in high school and now in college, it happens less often, but until more recently, I'd never seen or heard or felt anything like people say you do, terrifying demons and all that shit. The one time that happened, I was in bed on my left side, facing the wall. I sleep in a slim bed and the blanket is far too large and spills over onto the floor by a lot. Sometime in my tossing and turning and trying to get to sleep, the blanket came untucked from behind me and part of it was in the floor, but I didn't bother with it. Cue being nearly asleep when the paralysis sets in without me realizing it quickly enough and I can't move. I try rocking back and forth, but I can't, so I figure I'll just wait. Then I get this feeling of the blanket being pulled from behind me, like something's behind my back and in the floor, slowly pulling it, and my body's turning with it. The sudden sureness of I'm about to die in my bed and I can't move or scream or do anything had always accompanied the paralysis for me before, but only because that thought was just like there. I knew there was nothing in my bedroom floor pulling my blanket. I knew that, but it felt so real. And I'd never been more terrified and frustrated at my inability to move and so afraid of being turned all the way over and seeing what was pulling the blanket. Then I could move again and I rolled over and nothing was there. Nothing had ever been there and the blanket was barely in the floor at all, but I was sweating bullets and had to get out of bed for a while and look at Reddit. Oh boy, here we go. I hope I'm not late to the party. I've broken my sleep paralysis into 3 major periods. In chronological order, they are the old woman, the demon, and the suffocation. I'm 23 years old, and the earliest memory I have of sleep paralysis occurred around the age of 12. I was having a dream which turned pointedly dark. The skies, the theme, the general tone blackened, and I felt a sharp jab in my ribs. My eyes opened to a very old, ugly woman sitting directly on my chest, making it impossible for me to breathe. I was frozen completely, couldn't blink or move at all. At some point, I snapped out of it, which is still all I can hope for when it happens, and stayed awake for the rest of the night, scared out of my mind. This happened once every 2 weeks or so. Sharp jab, old woman, snap out of it. Then, one night, about 5 years later, the demon came. I remember the dream so vividly. I dreamed I had been possessed by the devil. I couldn't move on my own. I was slaughtering my friends against my will, doing horrible things. I was familiar to the onset of the paralysis by now. I could recognize it coming. I forced my eyes open, expecting the old woman, but this time it was different. There was a 3-foot-tall demon at the foot of my bed. Red, pockmarked, slimy, and evil. It stared at me for a minute, screeched, and I snapped out of the paralysis. This happened bi-monthly for the next 4 years. Once I started sharing a bed with my now fiance, the apparitions stopped coming. No more shadow people, no demon, nobody. Now I just nearly hyperventilate and suffocate. When it happens, I usually feel a very urgent sense of danger. I found that I can sort of control my breathing when it happens, so I start to breathe very loudly in short bursts until my fiance recognizes shit's weird, wakes up, and shakes me awake. I'd like to just mention that this is a terrible thing. It's horrifyingly scary to have no control of your body and to not be quite awake enough to jar yourself out of sleep. You feel like you're about to suffocate, about to die. The apparitions are terrifying, truly terrifying, and I never know if I'm going to get a decent night's rest or have a paralysis episode. For years, I thought I was alone with this, and then the internet showed me there were others. My parents never listened to me about it, and I would give anything to make it stop. It's comforting, in a way, to know I'm not the only one that sits there completely vulnerable at night while old witch women, shadow people, and demons try to suffocate me. SP is pure terror. I get sleep paralysis about once or twice a week. I only had really bad stuff happen the first 10 or so times. Now I found my trick is to just not open my eyes. It's way easier to realize when you're in sleep paralysis once you're familiar with it. The worst that'll happen if I do this will be just feeling really heavy vibrations, but that's it. If I open my eyes and panic, I see all the usual horrible hallucinations and shit like that. If I open my eyes and don't panic, realizing I'm in sleep paralysis, I sometimes just see people peeking into my room, or faces or stretched out faces and stuff superimposed over my vision. But it's not scary if I realize it. It's this moment where you're teetering on an edge between a demon jumping on your chest and suffocating you, and just normal old room with people just sort of hanging around looking at you. It's only if you really freak out that shit gets real. I still get it about twice a week or so, sometimes more, and I haven't had any scary experiences in a couple months. I usually don't fuck with that teetering state and just keep my eyes shut and hold my breath. Holding your breath is important because that's the first signal to you that you're in sleep paralysis. Can't take deep breath or talk or scream or whatever, so you want to scream and may even hear yourself screaming in your head, but you can't, so there's this crazy disconnect, and it frequently makes you feel like you're being suffocated from someone or something very heavy sitting on your chest or choking you. It's usually perceived as some alien or demon or some culturally relevant hallucination. The first couple times I had it and didn't realize what was going on at all was the scariest shit I've ever experienced, hands down. I think the vibrations are really fucking interesting. I have no clue physically why they happen, and I don't know if anybody does know. It's also interesting that the hallucinations are generally culturally relative. Experiencing it and learning about the science of all of it, to the extent that we've uncovered, has completely changed my perspective on memories and dreaming. It's fucking cool. My first time is when I was severely depressed in high school, very severely depressed. It wasn't depression so much as it felt like oppression. Chemical misfire, satanic curse, or whatever you want to call it. I couldn't sleep regularly, stomach ulcers, the whole deal. This particular night was like any other night as I went to sleep in my own bedroom that was basically just a bed and a dresser. I had a creepy night terror dream, and when I woke up, and I don't remember too well my physical state, but I couldn't move at all. I don't recall if it was actual paralysis or pure terror, but maybe a mix of both. I couldn't move. What I do remember, however, was as soon as I opened my eyes, 3 faces came down immediately into mine and dissipated when they about touched me. The faces looked like tiki faces you see at luau's in Hawaii and such, like the mask Aku Aku in Crash Bandicoot. As soon as that happened, all I could do was stare at the ceiling. I was in a state of doom and terror, just like the stories in the rest of this thread. Dark figures with nothing but shadowy features appeared in my peripheral. They formed a weird cult-like circle around my bed and held hands and had dark, melting candles, if that makes any sense. It was like something out of a corny cult movie. Holding hands, chanting, looking upward, same thing. Anyway, I gained control of my head and turned my neck to stare directly in my clock's bright light that was inches from my bed until my mind got right. I hesitantly and bravely got out of my bed, made my way to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror until I calmed down. The problem is my face looked weird. Not terrifying, but weirdly distorted. I sat down in the bathroom until I decided to go to the living room and watch Malcolm in the Middle till it was light outside. Loved that show that night. This happened several times after, but not to the extent as the first time. Mostly just waking up to molten lava faces and feeling people talking to me saying stuff like, "Let's get rid of him," or "fucking orphan bastard." I started to realize this wasn't going to let up and began to form a weird, distant relationship with this phenomena. I didn't feel crazy because I knew it wasn't me. As I was forced to interact with this, I decided to form a relationship with these things like people I worked with rather than ghosts and figures creeping in my house. That's the way I treated it anyway. Here's my experience dealing with it from childhood. It starts off topic a bit, but only to explain where I was coming from. Imagine you have a fear of werewolves. So bad that you can't walk outside at night, even just 10 feet, without running back to the house. Imagine this lasts until you are 13. Due to your unnatural fear, you have night terrors every night. They all go the same. You are minding your own business when suddenly a werewolf mauls the person in front of you. You run, it chases, you get to your bed and dive under the covers. It starts to rip at your back, you wake up. Here is where the sleep paralysis comes in. You wake up to a feeling like somebody just grabbed your spine and is slicing up your spinal cord slowly. It's not painful, just feels like it's ripping while numb. You open your eyes but can't move. It feels like there's a person holding you down and you have no sensation aside from your spine. At the same time, all the shadows in your room become the silhouette of the beast tearing at your back, because the hormone can often cause hallucinations and the DMT that was causing your dream is still wearing off. It only lasts for seconds, but you have no control of time. It feels like 10 minutes. You finally wake up crying, wondering where it went and when it's going to jump back out of the shadows. And it does, the moment you go back to sleep. Every fucking night. It's a never-ending cycle. You want to end the fear because you hate the nightmares, but the nightmares and waking up from them are so terrifying that you hope they don't happen before you fall asleep. So they happen, and the fear stays. For those wondering, it ended after I realized I was dreaming and consciously switched places with the werewolf to try on his shoes. I woke up and instead of my back being ripped apart, my stomach was twisting inside out, and I thought I had actually become one. Since then, I haven't had but maybe one dream involving a werewolf and haven't noticed any sleep paralysis. I guess it was self-induced from my fear and shame. Prior to these terrors, I used to thrash in my sleep. I used to give my grandparents bruises, and they always make me feel like a devil worshiper needing an exorcism about it. Sometimes I miss those nightmares because I've not remembered a single dream since then. Happened yesterday. Highlights of many. While sleeping in the passenger seat of a car hurtling along westbound I-80, my head and neck are slumped in such an awkward position without a pillow that I start having difficulty breathing. Because of this, I am roused just enough to take a little breath and fall back to sleep paralysis. My sole companion, the driver, was talking on the phone and my seat was back a bit, out of their periphery. I am aware that I am in sleep paralysis, somewhat used to it now, but breathing gets more difficult. I feel somewhat comforted by the thought that I couldn't possibly die that way without gasping awake, but that didn't keep my stress response from kicking in. I tried yelling for help, but only a soft came out, not even louder than the tires. For what seemed like 5 terrible minutes, every bit of effort my brain could muster was put into raising my forearm enough to slap my head out of that trachea pinching position. Eventually, I did, took some deep breaths, and asked if the driver could hear me. I just figured it was sleep noises. TLDR, lucid feeling of self-suffocation with neck position making it very difficult to breathe. Managed to lightly slap myself fully awake. 2. Woke up and walked upstairs after a bad dream to ask my mom and house guests a question to calm myself down. I walked up to the dining room table where they were working on something, facing away from me, and asked them. They turned around and had no faces, just similar hair on a similar body. A little weirded out by that, and they're not answering. I went to my dad, and he turned out the same. I thought, fuck this. I'm still dreaming. I'll go back to bed. So I go back downstairs and settle up in bed, and after I'm comfortable, I notice the big ground level window in the wall opposite me is opened. About 5 yards back, there's an amorphous cloaked figure peering in at me. Badgers, fucking badgers, start coming in through the window, biting and clawing at me as if playing minion to this shadowy figure. I managed to close the window, but too many badgers made it into my room already. In agony, I received a real down-to-your-soul look from the figure outside. Then I woke up. TLDR, demon/devil/whatever, fear, summons bedroom badger attack after removing loved ones' faces. Inception dream within a dream style. If someone knows what I'm about to refer to, please let me know. I remember reading the findings of a pretty recent study where people's sense of self-position as it relates to the physical often goes bonkers in these states, and the brain generally doesn't make sense of what's going on. So we perceive other sorts of very real feeling, yet very unknown and terrifying presences in our immediate vicinity. I've had sleep paralysis without perceiving presences, but they're there more often than not. Like others, it's always after sleep deprivation, stimulants, or stressful situations, life-death stuff. I fell asleep as soon as I got in bed. Next thing I know, I'm on all four, hands and knees, telling myself, "You're a grown-arse man, get up, she's not real." Poked my head up, looked left, and saw what I can only describe as half banshee, half hag staring at me. Opened its mouth and it screamed, which literally resonated throughout me. I woke up in the exact same position as I went to sleep, lying flat head, tilted to the left. Couldn't move, opened my eyes, and there she was, and she screamed again. Lasted about 10 seconds. Got into bed and drifted off, uncomfortably. Had full senses about me, bar sight. Everywhere was pitch black, but I knew I was out in town. I felt drunk. I kept falling over. Next thing I hear is footsteps on laminate flooring, the same type of flooring my flat has. I clicked at that second I was dreaming and woke up instantly thinking that I had heard someone in my flat. I was belly down, head turned to my right. I heard the footsteps again, unable to move. I then felt a weight on the back of my legs and slowly moving its way up my body until my entire body felt like it was under an immense weight. Next thing I know, I have a hot breath on my neck and I can hear deep breathing. At this point, I had clicked what was going on, but I wasn't expecting to feel the breath, so that freaked me out. It lasted about 30 seconds and took every ounce of willpower to force my body to react as if a person was on top of me. This one is my funniest/best one. I woke up in a sit-down-like position. Essentially, I had gone to sleep propped up. Again, I had fallen straight to sleep from exhaustion. When I did wake, I was paralyzed, but no weight on me. Looked forward and saw Hades from that old Disney film, Hercules. I laughed and fell back to sleep. This cycle continued for another 40 minutes, each vision getting creepier and less funny. Literally every 3 minutes, sleep, wake up, see something, fall back to sleep. I was more exhausted than ever, and it was now 4 a.m. Next thing I know, I'm dreaming and realize I am. Usually this happens to me and I instantly wake up. Not this time. I actually managed to lucid dream. The dream started off as a nightmare, seeing most of those figures approaching me. I thought about fighting for a split second, but then just had the realization I should be able to do anything. I waved a hand and they were gone. I spent the rest of the dream flying and conjuring fire in my hands. That one was totally worth the paralysis. My story leaches into the paranormal. I was 7, first time sleep paralysis. Woke up in my bed with a figure in the corner. It started to move towards me, and like everyone else here, there were no distinct features. It got to my feet and I felt the weight of it. I was terrified. Eventually, I blacked out and had one of the most intense dreams that I can recall, as if this was last night. I was in a pure white room, walking between long shelves of white. Each shelf had books all the way to the ceiling. Each book was white, and there were no labels. As I walked down an aisle, I felt I was being pulled towards the end of the aisle by something sinister, but I couldn't turn my head towards the end of the aisle. All I could do was watch the books as I passed them. Eventually, though, I got to the end and finally turned to a raised area with steps leading to a throne. It was pure white like the rest of the room. And a foot above the throne was a black sphere. In that moment, I could feel its thoughts. It told me that it wanted me to suffer. It wanted to kill my family while I watched. It was pure hatred. At that moment, I woke up, and this thing was on my legs. I flipped out and started screaming, "Mom!" I was able to move again. My mom ran into the room and turned the lights on. She calmed me down and I laid back down to sleep, while about 30 seconds later, she ran into the room freaking out. She was highly religious at that point and started to pray out loud, saying, "In the name of Jesus, get out." She woke up my brother, who somehow slept through the whole ordeal, and now we're both freaking out, crying. Well, years passed, and I didn't really think about it until a TV show came on talking about sleep paralysis. My mom and I got to talking, and I said, "Hey, remember that one night? What happened?" Well, she said I was too young at the time and didn't want to scare me. She recapped her version of the story, how she ran into the room to hear me screaming. She went back to her room and my stepfather was awake and asked if everything was okay. She said it was just a bad dream. He said, "That's weird. I've been awake for a while and I heard a woman, clear as day, talking in that room." He said she was repeating herself over and over, saying in a very calm voice, "You need to call out to your mother. You need to call out to her right away. Call out to her." I don't remember that at all. I have no recollection of a voice. I've had 6 episodes that I can remember. One just happened last night, actually. I know this thread is pretty old, but if someone sees this, I hope you enjoy. I will be telling 3 since they're the only interesting ones, as the others, nothing spooky happened. The first one I'll be sharing happened last summer at my sister's apartment. This one is kind of spooky. I went up to see my sister to drink and do other stuff. When we finally went to bed, I was on the couch and she slept in her bed in her room, which had no door. This has significance. I was falling asleep and all of a sudden I woke up. I knew what was happening, so it wasn't too scary. And I wiggled myself out of it and I fell back to sleep. And it happened again. I wiggled out of it again and just stood up to shake it off. I fell back to sleep and this time I couldn't wiggle myself out of it. So I was like, shit, this sucks. And then I heard a phone ring and my sister answered it. Her voice became shaky. I know this isn't really common in SP episodes, but none of this happened IRL. My sister says, "Oh my God," which of course freaks me out a bit, but I was still in SP. My sister started getting things together, I assume, since I can't see what she's doing, and walks by me and looks straight into my open eyes and says, "Should I wake him up?" As if she's asking permission or maybe just asking herself, and then says, "I don't think I will," and heads out the door. What feels like hours pass by and she comes back, but not with my sister, but some demonic figure following. This demon had long black hair and moved really odd, and her voice, only assuming it's a woman, sounded like there was gunk backed up in her throat. And they walked into my sister's room and sat down and just talked about stuff, but I can't remember what now. I finally woke up for real this time and ran into her room to see if she was okay, and she was sound asleep. I tell her the next morning and she's just bewildered by the story, and we both assumed it was her talking in her sleep, made a scenario in my head. Another one that's weird and kind of spooky, I was in my own room this time and woke up to see a man sitting on the side of my bed looking down at me. No facial features, but by the arch in the back, I could tell they were looking down. I could see the silhouette of a brimmed hat and a long coat. And then the weirdest thing happened. They reached down into their pocket and handed me a pill and forced me to take it. And once I did, I was in a lucid dream state, and the scene had a little Tokyo vibe to it and a lot of neon signs. Everyone there seemed to be somewhat confused as well. We were in a building with a lot of windows, and then I looked behind me to see two people coming towards me. Both of them were women. I don't remember their facial features that well, but I remember one kept asking me to kiss their arms, and I kept saying no, but she got more aggressive and eventually started an attempt of attacking me. Their figure changed, and they looked like Orochimaru from Naruto. I eventually attacked back and ripped off their cloak, and they had the tail of a fish, so it was a mermaid, I'm assuming, and then they sunk into the ground. After all that mess, I wanted it to be over as I was getting annoyed more than I was scared, and all of a sudden, I heard someone call out my name, and I could recognize the voice. It was someone who I had a class with. I turned around and kept hearing them, but couldn't see them. And when I looked down, I saw someone under some blankets and flung them off, and they were right there and just said, "This isn't real, get out." I started to freak out a bit and asked around, and a person came up to me and said, "Check your phone. We're about to send a message, and if it comes through, we know this is fake." As soon as they said that, I got a message on my phone, but the dream ended right there, and I woke up and just laid down for a bit. This one was odd for me since none of my SP hallucinations ever interacted with me, and it felt really real. This one happened last night, and it was really short. I was spending the night with my girlfriend, and she was sitting beside me drawing, and as I was about to fall asleep, SP kicks in, and I see an angelic woman standing in the corner of the room. She had long blonde hair, average height, and had this calming aura around her that was literally glowing. This person said, "Please climb up this ladder." There was a ladder that was also glowing, leading into my girlfriend's ceiling. My eyes instantly closed, but for the first time ever, I was still in SP. And then I felt this dark presence next to me, so I began grunting, and I heard my girlfriend ask, "Are you awake? Are you okay?" And she kept shaking me until I woke up. This was the first time I've had SP in a few months, and it was very short and odd. I find SP very fascinating and wish we knew more about it and these common figures people see. I know this isn't the case for everyone that has SP, as some people hate it and are terrified by it. Ever since I was little, my dreams have been stranger than the average person's. This has made me fascinated by dreams and what our brains do while we sleep. I was away in another town for some practical experiments with the rest of my class. We're spread out over the whole country since the program is mostly web-based, so everybody studies from home, but we get together a few times a year. I shared room with this guy, small, younger than me, skinny, and a bit awkward. Doesn't say much. First night, I noticed he sleep talks a lot, saying weird shit. Second night, I had trouble sleeping, but eventually fell asleep. I always sleep on my stomach since all stories I have heard about sleep paralysis have occurred when the person was lying on their back, and I wanted to avoid the possibility of seeing something spooky. All of a sudden, I wake up hearing my roommate moaning and kissing me on my back. I was so confused/startled, I didn't know what to do, and it was just weird. My first thought was that his sleep talking had evolved into sleepwalking, so I cleared my throat in a polite way of saying, "Hey, you are sleepwalking and being fucking weird." After the second time of clearing my throat, the kissing stopped and everything went dead silent. So I thought he had woken up and was confused, so I just thought I would give him some time to realize what was going on, and I didn't want him to feel ashamed or anything, so I just lie there pretending to be asleep. But I never hear him walking off and going back to his own bed. Instead, I just think he's standing there, staring at me. After like 30 seconds, I slowly turn around, expecting him to stand there like a fucking psycho. But no one is there. He's lying dead asleep in his bed across the room. The day before, we had some homeless people break into the rooms, so I thought, WTF, is there a homeless person hissing under my bed? I checked, but nothing. Couldn't sleep for an hour or so, and every time my roommate talked in his sleep, I got so fucking scared. Anyway, I didn't realize until the day after that it might have been a sleep paralysis.